Welcome, everyone. It is the Feast of the Assumption today, and Anthony decided to go on vacation. So
It's gonna be so nice. It's gonna be so nice.
We'll actually be able to hear the guest speak without an interruption. We'll actually get to learn things.
So true.
It's gonna be it is gonna be nice. And
Personally, I
guest,
thought we should have named this show just because we were kind of hyping it up about like who our guest was gonna be, but then also you put Italy is fake in the title. I honestly thought we should have just named it something like pure racism and just left it at that. Like that's the title, just like pure racism, and just left it.
I was a little shocked at the title too. When I first saw that, I was like, "Oh, we're going pretty strong here."
Oh yeah, we're going right for it. Well, what's funny is all the so anyways, everyone, Brendan is our guest, and he is the founder of Papal. How do you pronounce it officially? I've never actually heard it pronounced.
So from my understanding, for English it's Zouave, but for French, which was the predominant nationality in the unit, it's Zouave. So I say Zouave.
Papal Zouave. So yeah, we have Brandon on to talk about Italian history and the Papal Zouaves. And as anyone on Twitter might have seen today, apparently when you make a claim like Italy is fake, all the Italian nationalists that I did not even know existed come out of the woodwork.
So true. So true.
And you've been dealing with them for a while.
Like I was telling you before, they really don't like me. What was that?
I said you've obviously seen
I've been dealing with them for a while. Yes, yeah, all the time. For some reason, whenever I put a meme out there or something too, and it's just a joke. It's kind of like the title of the video. Like we're playing things up a little bit, right? And they don't understand jokes. Out of every like Twitter mad, I think the most, they can't take any kind of joke at all. It's very it's just very funny, and they always call me Latinx. The memes that they make are really funny. One of my favorite, they had like my eye color from one of the videos, and they're like TI-50 or something. I don't know what that means. Like, I don't know why they're comparing my eye color. And then next to me is Garibaldi, and he has like perfect blue eyes. I don't understand. But the thing that's funny is I'm 0% Spanish. Sorry to disappoint. I'm 0%. I'm actually 50%. Yeah, 50% Southern Italian, mainly Neapolitan. My great aunt took a DNA test. She was 97% Italian, 3% Arab. I don't know what to tell you guys. I'm one of you.
I don't know, bro. I'm Spanish, though.
I was gonna say we do have our resident Hispanic on with us, of course.
Token Hispanic, yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. But.
Yeah.
So, Brendan, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, your organization? What got you into this?
Sure. So basically, I'm a soldier myself. So, and I take my faith seriously. So when I first learned that there was basically so recent of a soldiers that were Catholic and they fought in the Papal Army, I immediately clung to that. I just thought it was so fascinating, so cool. I first was recommended to read about them from gentlemen from the TFP, that's Tradition Family Property, about 4 years ago. And then I picked up Charles Coulon's book, which I would recommend anyone, should be anyone's first book on Papal Zouaves. It's called The Pope's Legion. And it really is a great summary of the events, sprinkled in with a lot of Catholic heroism from the Zouaves. So I read that about 3.5 years ago, and something just kind of stuck with me about these soldiers. Even after I put the book away, I'd always be looking online, and then I would see these pictures that I've never seen before. I'll just like search up Papal Zouaves and things like that. I'd be like, oh man, this is so cool. Like, oh, here's a picture of this guy I mentioned here. Oh, here's a picture of that. And I was having so much fun with it. And I'm in, like I said, the military, and I wanted something to do with some of the off time I had, right? Sometimes you sit around, you wait a while to do things, whatnot. Just kind of how it works, the hurry up and wait kind of culture. And I didn't want to just scroll social media all day long and do something stupid. I wanted to do something kind of productive. So I thought, this would be a fun little hobby to have. So I started my first Twitter account, which is called Papal Zouave History. But it became apparent to me after a short time period that something was needed, because how I like to describe it to people is I found this unit discarded, or I found this history cast aside, and I was kind of unearthing it, and I really wanted to unearth it for other people, especially other Catholic men. And on the feast day of the Immaculate Conception this past year, that's when I launched Papal Zouave International. It took a long time to get everything in the works behind the scenes, but we have 3 books released so far. I've got several videos, a lot of great stuff coming behind the scenes. So I'm pretty happy with where we're at.
Did you said you got into the history about the Zouaves 4 years ago? Did you always take your faith seriously? Are you a cradle Catholic, a convert?
Yeah, so I'm a cradle Catholic. As I was mentioning earlier, my mom's side is the complete Italian. On my dad's side is mostly English with a little bit of German mix, maybe a small bit of French. What happened was, on my mom's side, came about the end of the 20th century, or excuse me, the beginning of the 20th century, like so many other American families that are from, that have that Southern Italian descent. And then on my dad's side, we can really trace back to like Virginia farmers in the 1700s. So my dad's side was Episcopalian. And what ended up happening is my dad ended up converting later in life, after he married my mom. They're both what's the word? The cafeteria Catholics. So I grew up in that cafeteria Catholic kind of environment. So I didn't take things really seriously. The proper term for me would be like a revert. So I started to take things seriously probably about sophomore year of college, which would be probably about 2018. It took a while though. I went to Israel twice, and I wasn't even. It took. I like to say it took 2 trips to Israel, some change, for me to even start taking things seriously. So, ashamed to say about that though. But yes, I'm a revert.
2018. Yeah, that's
so long ago, man.
It on one hand, it doesn't feel.
Yeah, it was 2018, 2019, right before COVID hit.
Right. Yeah. That's when I started to take my faith seriously again too. Was around Advent of 2018. So about the same time.
Yeah, I think I was starting.
And then I was
chosen the faith was around there, because I'm essentially a convert, and so I think it was around 2018. I think it was actually in like September or something of 2018 that I kind of started really like kicking the tires and doing my initial investigation. It was so long ago though.
Yeah, it was. I went to Texas A&M, so I grew up I went to school with one of, I would say, the greatest churches for any college campus to have. St. Mary's is very well known, especially in Texas. They produce some of the most priestly vocations out of any student center in the country. And that was a very good environment to be for someone who was just starting their faith seriously. What really got me coming back in, it was a mass shortly after coming back. I guess it was the beginning of junior year, actually. I finished my sophomore year. It was the very beginning of junior year. I was coming back for a mass. I was with my wife and girlfriend at the time. And I forget the exact verse number, but it was about how there was a dinner banquet and you were getting kicked out. And you're like, Lord, why am I not like invited in? And you're gnashing teeth, and Lord was like, get away from me. I don't know you. Something kind of came over me, and I was like, dang, it's me. I'm claiming to be doing things, but I'm actually like just really not. I'm like actually a very serious cafeteria Catholic. So a lot of the shame came in, and then from that point on, there was really just this fire to take things seriously.
Yeah. How did you start to get into this element of history? Because I'll be honest, I think for the average, even just American Catholic, the study of the history of what became the state of Italy is something that is not going to come to the forefront of their knowledge when they're thinking about Catholic history.
I think most people, Catholic or not, most Americans probably have very little idea that the what they know as the modern state of Italy is only as old as our American Civil War.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because I was thinking, maybe Catholics know about the Papal States. They've at least heard it. They haven't done a historical dive into it, but they've heard of it.
Mhm.
Maybe some Americans have at the same time. If we're lucky nowadays, you never know. With the street interviews and geography, it makes you really black-pilled on the education system, rightly so. So, but yeah, how did you get into studying this discussion, or this topic rather, of the history of the state of Italy?
So it comes hand in hand with the Zouaves, and that's what a lot of people don't seem to understand. You can't separate the two, because not my organization is a Catholic organization. For me, it has to be. My organization has to be, the term I like to use is counter-revolutionary. The cause of the Zouaves is my cause as well, if that makes sense. So for me, that's defending the temporal rights of the pontiff. And so when I was first learning about the Zouaves, like I said, why I was interested in them is because as someone in the military myself, I saw them as the ideal Catholic soldier. The stories of their heroism, their martyrdom, they were truly crusaders in the proper sense. They called their fight against the Piedmontese, they called it the 9th Crusade. So they were very serious about it. And that was where this attraction was felt. So naturally, as I learned more about them, I also have to learn more about Italy. And like I said, I'm of this Neapolitan descent. And as I became more Catholic, beforehand, as a cafeteria Catholic, I don't want to say like idol, it might be too strong of a word, but basically instead of revolving around the faith, what my life revolved around was like the rah-rah, American, like, oh, I bleed red, white, and blue, like, a lot of conservatives, right? That's kind of what everything revolved around. So that desire or understanding of my past, that Neapolitan heritage was, I didn't really have an interest, but it was completely lacking, but as I learned more about the Zouaves, that started to really come out. And I started to really want to dig in and learn more. So it's kind of dual for me. I got the Zouaves, which I want everyone to know about. I think it's super cool. They're Catholic heroes, they're martyrs. And then on the other hand, too, it's the personal level. I have family from that area. I have family from Rippi, the Papal States. So there's that personal connection, too. So it's good to know how I got here, how my family got here. And it's because of the Piedmontese and their terrible laws and what they did, like, because all the Southern immigration happened, all this Southern emigration happened because they just ruined the South. They ruined Southern Italy.
Yeah, I guess I have like a 3-part question, if it's okay, Rob.
Of course.
It's probably along your line of question, but so lay us, I guess, the initial historical groundwork for this type of conflict. That's my first question. And then as you're doing that, introduce the characters, the main characters that people should know about. And then I guess a third tangential point I'd like to sneak in there is, does this conflict also have to do with what became the Sanfedistas, if memory serves? Because I've done a little bit of research into them, but I know it was in Italy, but I don't know if they're connected or if they're not.
Yeah, Rob, feel free to jump in here when you want to, because you also know a little bit about this history. So my main expertise on this would be after 1859, because that's when really the conflict starts. The Zouaves call it the 9th Crusade, starts to emerge. So the Sanfedisti was prior to all of that by about 60 years, 70 years. So during the so during the Neapolitan times, when they were coming through, the peninsula, they eventually got to the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, the French army, and they took over. And so there was a cardinal by the name of Cardinal Ruffo, who a very good friend of the king, very well connected. He, like many other people from the Two Sicilies, didn't stand for it. He was not happy with the French takeover and occupation. So he raised the peasant army. The full name, it escapes me at the moment, but it's something along the lines of like the Holy Catholic Army. I'm gonna look this up because it's such a great name.
Army of Holy Faith and Our Lord Jesus Christ.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah. So wonderful, and they ended up actually retaking the city of Naples after some time. You know, with a peasant army, and there's a really popular song. What's the name of the song again? I'm very bad at foreign languages.
I don't know.
Canta. But anyway, I'll throw it in the chat later on. There we go. Yes, yeah. That's a really wonderful song that became really popular because of all that. So they ended up like everything was good for a while, but then the French ended up coming back. How many years later? Rob, do you recall?
Let's see if I can take a look here real quick.
Yeah, but basically, what ended up happening after that was then you had Napoleon kind of take over on the French side of things, and then he started sweeping through Europe. And it wasn't until the it was, what was it, in 1814 or 1815 when they redrew the map of Europe. What was that conference called?
It was the Congress of Vienna.
The Congress, when they had the Congress of Vienna, and then they redrew the lines, and that's when the Kingdom of Two Sicilies got its territory back. And then you had the 48 revolutions, which kind of destabilized all of Europe, and that infected what I know about the most about those in the peninsula would be in the Papal States. You actually had Garibaldi stage a revolution in. And they actually ended up taking over. They killed forget his position in the papal government, but he was like one of the highest lay positions, and they ended up killing him. He was a minister, and it was in front of the Pope too, Pope Pius IX, and Pope Pius IX had to flee to Gaeta, which is a fortress in the northern portion of the Two Sicilies, and an army had to be raised. The French were better at this point, so it was mostly French, but you also had help from the Spanish and the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies as well. And they retook Rome after several months, and Pius IX was put back in place. But when Pius IX, Blessed Pius IX, first came into power, he was considered a liberal because he was granting all these. He was granting all of these concessions to. In terms of the government, giving lay people a lot more power than they had previously, being very, I'm trying to think of the word right now, commuting a lot of sentences or being very merciful with people who were previously rioting and things like that. But after this happened, boy, did he take a turn. He flipped. He became a very big conservative. And then as we move forward, we get to about 1859. So during this time period, or just Italy in general at this point, is about 10 different states. So in southern Italy, you have the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, which was, I would say, it's the largest. I'd say next to the Papal States, it's the most pious. So its last ruler, the servant of God, Francis II, is he's on his path to sainthood, and so was his mother, Blessed Marie of Savoy. And then you have in central Italy, you have the Papal States. So Blessed Pope Pius IX is also on his way to sainthood. And then in you have a very small little country called San Marino, like just like a speck in the middle of that. And then in northern Italy, you have the Kingdom of Sardinia, Piedmont, which is the northwest. And then you have the duchies of Parma, Modena, and Tuscany, and they have a lot of Austrian influence. And then the same thing in the northeast, you have the Kingdom of Lombardia, Venetia. And that's part of the problem in terms of, for the Italian nationalists, is in terms of the peninsula, and I don't know this side of the history too well, but over a period of time, the Austrians gain a lot of influence in that northern area.
Yeah. So at the Congress of Vienna, the Austrian statesman who largely orchestrated the Congress of Vienna, Count Metternich, he was all about trying to offset power, right? because they had just gotten through the Napoleonic Wars, and they wanted to balance power throughout all of Europe. And Italy was kind of seen as this middle ground between like France and Austria. So at the Congress of Vienna, kind of not so much actual control, but more influence was given to Austria over Venice and the northeastern, parts of Italy, whereas France was given some influence over in the west, and then you had kind of the Kingdom of Piedmont there in the middle to kind of oppose and balance both sides there. So
yeah, we're even missing during this whole. We completely skipped over, and that's fine because time and importance of the Zouaves. There was even one point where you had a portion. It was pretty unsuccessful, but you had a group of I don't want to say it, maybe Italian Alliance is a good word to use, but led by the Piedmont. And you even had a contingent from the Papal States come, and the Pope wasn't 100% behind it, but they actually tried to push the Austrians out of power. They weren't very successful with that. But now we're in 1859, and with the rise of nationalism, the pot is stirring again. And so you have people like Victor Emmanuel II, who was the king of Sardinia Piedmont at the time. You had Mazzini, you have Garibaldi, and you have Prime Minister Cavour. All these different characters have different ideas about how they want Italy to be. Victor Emmanuel II, obviously, he's the monarch. He wants a monarchy over all of Italy. You have Cavour, who of the same mindset as prime minister. Maybe he wants a bit more of a constitutional monarchy kind of thing, maybe a little more liberal. But essentially, he wants Victor Emmanuel II in charge instead of Garibaldi. Then you have Garibaldi, who prefers a republic. He really does prefer a republic, but as we see in the story, he was okay with a monarchy being in charge at the time. And then Mazzini was probably the most liberal of all of them. He really wanted to cause chaos.
Because Mazzini started the Young Italy group earlier in the century, which was very liberal, very revolutionary. And when there was the uprising in Rome in 1848, and Garibaldi declares the Roman Republic, he puts Mazzini in charge of this, socialist republic. So yeah, Mazzini and Garibaldi were definitely the most liberal and revolutionary, and it's thought that both of them were probably Masons, although it can't be conclusively proven.
Sure.
Yeah, I definitely think Garibaldi was. I got this picture that I found, and it's like by picture, it's just an illustration. Someone drew it, but it's really interesting. They got Garibaldi around all this Mason stuff, the big all-seeing eye. It's like these people, the secret societies at the very least. It might not they might not be Freemason proper, but then there's the the Alta Vendita group and things like that, the Carbonari, and the book I just republished, The Making of Italy. They go into all these connections with the Carbonari and things like that. So. Yeah. Sure, maybe not at the what's the most popular lodge called, like the whatever Scottish Rite.
Yeah, Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, and
because they would have been
whatever it is, it might not be that, but it's something else.
Mm-hmm. They would have been the Lodge of the Orient in Italy, and that lodge is far more liberal and how to put it, just revolutionary in general.
Yeah, like extreme.
Yeah, maybe far more extreme
in its views. What I was thinking as you were giving the historical outline was, I guess, kind of for the listeners who have read particularly the encyclicals of the 19th and 20th century, see the greatness of the anti-liberal popes, really beginning with Gregory the 16th. Some go even back a little bit more with maybe Pius VII being kind of like the, if you will, the one who kind of dips his toes into the liberal condemnations. But Gregory the 16th, of course, or 18th, excuse me, of course, Pius IX with his syllabus, Quanta Cura. And I think what's so interesting about this is that people have to understand Pius IX was not just up in a tower writing down things he didn't like. He was seeing the consequences of liberalism play out in what was the holy the holy lands of Italy, if you will, with the Papal States. He was seeing this practically play out. And by analogy, we can see that while liberalism in and of itself is not as radical as, say, full-blown Soviet communism, its practical conclusions lead to the same end in the context of the church, which is the repression of the church. I mean, even in the United States, it's like, okay, you can't have prayer in school. You can't put up the 10 Commandments on any type of public ground, right? If a state tries to put crucifixes or the 10 Commandments in classrooms, all of a sudden there's a massive media frenzy storm and everyone goes insane. And then, of course, we see the natural degrading of human society here in the United States of morals.
Mhm.
And it reminds me of what every traditional catechism says, which is if you want the flourishing of a civil society, of just a natural society, you have to have religion. You have to have not just religion in general, but divine religion. You have to have the Catholic religion, the one true religion. And so kind of explain to me and to the viewers, I guess, the mind of Pius IX in this period of just kind of wildness and craziness with the revolution starting to kick off, because again, I think a lot of people reading it in foresight just think that he was kind of this cranky old pope writing things he didn't like up in the Scholastic Tower. So kind of lay the groundwork, what's going on outside.
So yeah, like I was saying, he experienced himself the fruits of the revolution when he was forced out of Rome. He had to escape out of Rome himself under a disguise. And he watched his minister get killed in front of him. He actually watched his Secretary of State was also shot in front of him from the windows in the Papal Palace. So we're dealing with a man who even his friends were, maybe even martyred is the proper word to use. But even historically, outside of that, when you think of the French Revolution, which was only 50, 60 years before, you just going at that same time, you had all these revolutions sweeping across Europe. So you're witnessing or seeing the Pope, the man is seeing the world completely flip from Christendom, which was in its final stages, and he's witnessing that transition to the modern world, and it was a violent transition. So of course he's going to respond with a heavy hand. Some people say reactionary, whatever you want to call it. He had to use what he had, his powers. Plus, as you were saying, the Pope started to become more outspoken, writing more very anti-liberal things. Blessed Pius IX, I consider him one of the first popes as well to really utilize his papacy with writing encyclicals. Because you also remember that this time period too, as we gain more technology and the press becomes easier to use and distribute and things like that. He was really trying to reach all of these Catholics when this prevailing liberalism, this prevailing ideology, all of these isms, nationalism, anything was just poisoning and corrupting the mind of Christendom. He felt like he had to do what he had to do, and often it was heavy-handed, but necessary, I would say.
So 1859, 1860, Piedmont really kind of kicks off what they call the Risorgimento, the resurgence,
Yes.
the unification of Italy. And by like the end of 1860, I mean, basically everything except Rome is under their control, and Rome's only saved because of the French,
Yes.
correct?
Yes. No, actually, no, that was 67. So what ended up happening is, so now it's 1859. So the Victor Emmanuel II, again, he really wanted to unite Italy. He felt it was the right time. So he came out, he sent Cavour to have a secret agreement with French Emperor Napoleon III, where Napoleon III promised to push the Austrians out of the peninsula in return for Savoy and Nice, which is near the French border. So in March, the Piedmontese began mobilizing along the border with Lombardy, which provoked Austria to mobilize themselves in defense. So in April, when the Kingdom of Sardinia refused to demobilize, so Victor Emmanuel II, that's when Austria came in, and there was a short war. France joined on the side of Piedmont like they agreed, and after several months, they defeated Austria. And so during at the end of the war, or during the war, excuse me, you had Piedmont stage uprisings, the Tuscany, Parma, Mondeno, so the small duchies in northern Italy we talked about earlier, and then the northernmost territory, the Papal States, the Romagna, causing them to destabilize. And then shortly after that war ended, all those territories were annexed by Sardinia and Piedmont. So as Austria was defeated, they ceded Lombardy to France, who then gave it to Sardinia, and then in turn, Sardinia ceded Savoy and East to France. So it was one just big switcheroo.
And those territories they annexed were annexed after votes that looked very similar to 2020, right? Basically,
so let me. I'm not going to comment on that, but what I will comment on, what I will say, the fake votes and everything like that. What I will say is every single time you see a plebiscite or whatever annexation and this votes and it's through Sardinia and Piedmont, it is the most sus vote count that I know of. We're talking like in the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, 99% voted that be annexed to the Kingdom of be annexed to Sardinia and Piedmont. In Rome, after 1870, you had 99% vote to be annexed to the new Kingdom of Italy. The Garibaldians who came in were allowed to vote. They would antagonize people who voted no. They don't want to be annexed. You had people double voting. You had more votes sometimes than people like living in the area. And like everyone knew, it's like an open secret. And that's often that we'll see in this history when like Sardinia Piedmont tries to play dumb, like, oh, we didn't know Garibaldi was here. We didn't know he was getting involved. Like, oh, no, we didn't know this was going. It's an open secret. Everybody knows what's going on. But yeah, that was really, yes, annexation. Please be right. Yeah, so after that, Napoleon III tried to influence Pius IX to accept the annexation of the Romagna, the Sardinia Piedmont, but he wasn't going to budge. He was pretty mad. So he actually excommunicated everyone who had taken part in the capture of the Romagna. He didn't name any names specifically, but again, if you use your reasoning, use your intellect, we can deduce who those people are. So people weren't happy about that. So that's the stage coming out of coming into the very beginning of 1860. So then what comes next is Garibaldi and 1000 in May. But before that, now we get into the Zouaves. Now we get into the Papal Army. So there are two options in front of Blessed Pius IX. So his Cardinal Secretary of State, Anatoly, he really wanted to rely on diplomacy. That was his main thing he thought would defend the Papal States. But on the flip side, you had a Papal Chamberlain who was Belgian, who actually was previously in the army, whose name was Monsignor Xavier de Merode. He was private chamberlain. He believed that diplomacy ain't going to work. He was relying on that military background he had, and so what he did was he really wanted to strengthen the Papal Army, and this was a huge undertaking. The Papal Army was really weak, really ill-equipped, but he had a vision. The army could be revitalized through a multiple force of pious Catholics akin to a crusade. So Blessed Pius IX ended up going with Merode's plan, and they set out a call across Christendom to raise these volunteers to fight in the 9th Crusade. So you had about 5,000 foreign recruits were raised from almost 30 different countries at the time. Most were Irish, Austrian, French, and Dutch. So the Austrians formed 5 battalions of light infantry. The Irish formed the battalion of St. Patrick. The French and Dutch formed the Franco-Belgian battalion, which was the beginning of the Papal Zouaves that actually after 1860, that's when they took that name. But really, they were the Zouaves in all but name. You know, they at the time of when the conflict really started to heat up again in October for the Papal Army, about half the unit had the Zouave uniform that I share mostly on my social media. But anyway, a lot of the volunteers came from noble lineage. So you had people like Henry de Cassanu, who started a different unit called Crusaders of Catalonia, but they were incorporated into the Papal Zouaves, so the Franco-Belgian battalion. You had Aficionado de Charette, who was the great nephew of François de Charette. Anyway, the general that was put in charge in the army was General de la Merciere. So he was self-exiled from France because he didn't agree with Napoleon III coming into power. And I think he was a cousin of Merode. I might be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure they were related to in some capacity. But anyway, so they're basically forming the army. They're retraining. They're gathering resources. They're doing what they can because they know a fight's coming. Now that summer, Garibaldi set sail. He started with 1,000 people. It was really, he ended up, maybe he started with 1,000, but he definitely ended up getting a lot more along the way. So no, 1,000 people didn't conquer the two Sicilies. I hate hearing that propaganda. But anyway, they take over Sicily, and then they end up crossing the Strait of Messina, and then they start engaging the Neapolitans on the mainland. And it wasn't too long. It really wasn't too long before the Kingdom of Two Sicilies fell, and a lot of that had to do with treachery in their army and things like that. A lot of intrigue, just a lot of we talked about the Alta Vendita, Carbonari, a lot of the secret societies. It was very, very sad what happened. But servant of God Francis II, he's a saint. I think every one of my lineage and descent really should ask for his intercession and hope his cause goes well. He gave up Naples without a fight. And I don't have the letter in front of me, but it's a very beautiful letter he wrote to his people. And he said that the prestige, the treasures, and the lineage of our people, the Neapolitan people, is beyond the conflicts of the day. It's not worth risking all of this and your lives for this conflict. And so he had one last stand. The name of the battle escapes me. It begins with a V, but then he ended up going to Gaeta and holding on to Gaeta for several months. But imagine our leaders doing that today. No, that wouldn't happen. But anyway, now we're getting into the September-October time frame, and there's two reasons that Sardinia Piedmont wanted to sweep the Papal States. Number one, of course, they wanted to unite Italy. Of course. Number two is they weren't exactly sure what Garibaldi was up to. So they gave him money, of course. They gave him supplies. They wanted him to take over, but it was still somewhat of a gamble, right? Because Garibaldi is a Republican. Victor Emmanuel II is a monarch. They didn't know if he would demand something or he would try to establish a republic. What ended up happening is he temporarily established himself dictator to do Sicily's Garibaldi. But when Victor Emmanuel II and Garibaldi met, he gave him the territory, so it wasn't really an issue. But so anyway, they invade the Papal army they invade the Papal States with about 70,000 soldiers. And look, there was one plan that they could do. They had one, it was a long shot. And the Papal army's plan was to hold out at Ancona. So Ancona was the eastern port of the Papal States. And the hope was that the world would see the violation of the rights of the Pope, the violation of his sovereignty, the right of the people of the Papal States to be themselves, would witness that, and there would be an outcry, and then you have the Catholic power like Spain, France, Austria intervene. Nobody intervened. It was very, very sad. They were by themselves, but nonetheless, that was their only hope. So what you had was the Papal army make a movement, right? So to get to Ancona. So during this movement, the very large portion, the Papal army is about 13,000 at this time. You had about 7,000 men get caught up in a town called Castelfidardo, which was just outside of Loreto. And this is the battle I'm describing right now was the biggest, most important of the campaign, which is why I'm focusing on it. But anyway, they get caught in Loreto. Loreto is very special. It houses the Holy House of Loreto, which is the home of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. It was brought over by angels during the Middle Ages. It's a very, very special place. And so General Lamerseri, and then there's another French general coming, Piedmont. They're trying to come up with a plan to get to Ancona, and they notice that there's a large force from Caldini blocking their path. So they're coming up with a plan to pass through. And they came up with, I would say it's a fix and bypass kind of mission, the military terms of it. So basically, they would divide their forces into three. You would have two basically attacking columns, so two main columns, and then you would have like a baggage train, so like a reinforcement column. And the one column, one attacking column would fix the enemy in place. So make sure they don't move, make sure that they can't mess with anyone else. Then you would have the last column, the last attack column would act as a reserve, but they'd be able to escape to Ancona with the baggage train and everything else. And then you would have a lot of forces in Ancona to hold out for hopefully many months until Catholic power comes and saves you. Well, it didn't work out like that, unfortunately. The men the night before, they received Holy Communion. They went to Mass. They heard confessions. I'll pull up a quote about a priest who described the scene. It's very, very moving. A lot of these men knew they were going to be martyred. They knew they weren't going to make it out. So a French priest described this scene. The scene worthy of the epoch of the Crusades, which as a priest and a Frenchman gave me the greatest consolation. At 4 o'clock, Monastery, Piedmont, and all the staff officers and the guides in the German regiments, the foreigners and the natives, all received Holy Communion. I saw the great number of them prostrate in prayer. On the ramparts toward the north side of the plain, perceiving a movement amongst the enemy troops, which seemed like a swarm of ants in the distance, the Franco-Belgian said to me, "Bless me, Monsieur l'Abbé, for we shall never meet again on earth." So the columns head out. And look, the issue here is that they were ill-equipped, under-trained. The Piedmontese army is one of the most well-trained armies at the time. You had an initial upper hand being gained by the Papal army. They start going up the mountain. They're about to crest the summit of the hill, and then because they were about on par in terms of forces at the time. And then you had Italian reinforcements coming over the hill, and if they just got pushed back. But during this brawl, there's some interesting things were happening. You had Captain Schret, who was captain at the time, so aficionado Schret. He found one of his former classmates from the military academy at Turin, where he was trained, who was on the Piedmontese side. They had actually a chivalric saber duel. And people stopped fighting to watch it, and then Aficionado ended up winning. So that's just a little cool fact. You had another Zouave go down by the name of Joseph Louis Guerin. He's the Zouave who was closest to sainthood. He fell wounded. He has a packet in his home diocese of Nantes, which lists over a dozen cases of healings through his intercession. He even appeared to some people. Very, very, very interesting. We can get into that later. But he received a mortal wound. He would die like a month later in a hospital. But anyway, I'm dragging it out a little bit. The Papal army, they lost. And a French general described the end scene of everything. He described it as what he was witnessing a ball for Louis XV, because there's just so many noble French people all over the field. Only a very small portion of the Papal army made it to Ancona, like 300, 400 or something. Because General Lamerseri, he thought the battle could end up winning. He saw his General Piedmont. He was mortally wounded. General Piedmont was leading that first attack column. He was shot 3 times. Each time he was shot, he said, "Courage, my children, God is with us. Courage, my children, God is with us. Courage, my children, God is with us." And he was shot off his horse. And as they're being pushed back from the crest of the hill, he's brought back to the back of the line. He's on a stretcher. And this sight really invigorated General Lamerseri. And that's when he committed his attack column. And no, it didn't make a difference. And he escaped to Ancona with like 300 men. 300 men out of
13,000. Okay.
No, of the 6,800. 13,000 was the total size of the whole Papal army at the time. 6,800 was the size of this contingent who was making their way to Ancona. And when he got in the gates, he said, I no longer have an army. This is just, you had some reinforcements head back. It was just utter confusion. You had a good portion head back to Loreto, and you had the Irish, the French, the Dutch. They wanted to keep fighting to the bitter end. They were like, "Well, we're ready to be martyred. Let's go." The Swiss and the other native units were like, "Now we're out," and they ended up. What's
So
called? They ended up. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they ended up surrendering with honors. But there were so many casualties. The Holy House of Loreto was turned into a hospital. So imagine you're a Zouave and you're dying, you're bleeding out or whatever, and the last thing you see is the Holy House of Loreto as you lay wait to die. And there's a beautiful little side chapel. Yeah, there's a beautiful little side chapel too in Loreto, and it's of the Crusades. St. Louis the Ninth is in and everything like that. And you imagine you're looking at that, it's like, I tried to do that. I tried my best. Yeah, I'm just dragging this part out. Sorry, I have a whole video on the Battle of Castelfidardo. I'd recommend y'all check it out. It was very glorious, and I have a whole book about the battle too, and several men in it. But Ancona didn't go very well. They held out for I think a little under 2 weeks, and then they capitulated. And with it, poof, just like that, the Papal States was now only Rome, and it's called the Lazio region. So it's just this really, I'm trying to figure out the best way to describe it. It's basically like a rectangle. So it's Rome and its immediate surroundings. That's it. All of Central Italy now just Rome and its immediate surroundings. So Napoleon III didn't. He made it a lot worse. That's what I was saying. Napoleon III did not help. The only reason that they didn't push through to the Lazio and to Rome was because he said, I don't give you permission for that. I give you permission to take the rest of Italy, or the rest of the Papal States.
Mm-hmm.
Not Rome, not yet. I sympathize with you, but not yet. He said, do it, but make it quick, were his words. So I started a little bit of a tangent there, but anything to add, Rob?
Not at the moment. I don't think so.
I thought of two things, which one of them might be further down in the historical timeline, because again, I'm really rusty in this area of history. But what was it? What was the general that you mentioned when he entered the town? He said, I don't have an army left. What was his name again?
General Lamonacere.
Okay.
Of French origin.
Yeah. It reminds me of, because if it's a historical discussion, my expertise is in the United States Civil War, the American Civil War. And it reminds me of the famous saying of General Pickett post Pickett's charge, Lee telling him to send his division back in. And he says, General Lee, I have no division. I.e. my entire army is pretty much gone. I could tell some funny stories about what took place after that. But tell me this, because I'm interested. So Rome, the Vatican, Rome, and basically immediate surroundings, that's all that's left of the Papal States by this time.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not today, because today we just know Vatican City, and it's much smaller. It's just a little, bunch of buildings, right? Glorious buildings, but a bunch of buildings in the center of Rome. How did we lose that territory down the timeline?
Oh, we're getting there. Don't worry. So that all happens in 1870. That is the siege of Rome, and that's. But in between, so now we're at 1861. There's one more big push by the Piedmontese to come in, and that's in 67. But before we get to 67, though, we got to talk about now the formation of the Zouaves themselves. So the papal army is in shambles. You had all these foreign recruits sent home, and you don't have many coming back. You do have some, but not many. So in this aftermath, you see the Franco-Belgian battalion then transition to the Papal Zouaves. They incorporate elements of the remaining, some elements of the Irish battalion and things like that. And so on January 1st, that's the name that they took. Their colonel was Colonel Beccoveri. He was in charge of them. And it was a relatively quiet time from 61 to 64. The papal army at the time, didn't grow that much. The Zouaves were just only a couple hundred in the unit. And it wasn't until 65 that things started to pick up again. And the reason things started to pick up again in 65 was because the September Convention was put into light. So during that time, they mostly protected the border, the Zouaves of the Papal Army. They protected the border, they fought brigands. But in 64, you had Napoleon and Victor Emmanuel II come up with a secret agreement. And part of this agreement was, okay, look, we'll get rid of our French garrison in Rome in 2 years, and you promise not to take over the Papal States or Rome. So for context, there was a garrison of French troops in Rome, and that served as a shield. You know, that was think of the Americans in Poland, Germany, you know, right now. It's kind of the same thing. It's like, oh, they're not going to come take over because we're here. It's that same mindset. So there's like, oh, no, we'll get rid of them in 2 years. You just have to promise that you're not going to invade. You have to promise. It's like, okay, sure, I promise I won't do it. They're going to do it. So in 65, that was a secret deal too. So in 65, that got leaked out. So all of a sudden, you're seeing now a resurgence in Papal Zouaves. You're seeing a resurgence of these people joining the Papal Army because they knew something was going to happen. And indeed it did. And in 67, that's when you see the Garibaldians come in. So Victor Emmanuel II and the secret society members, you know, all these people had the idea that, oh, we can do the same thing to Rome like we did with the two Sicilies. We'll just give Garibaldi money. We'll give him arms. We'll support him. We won't say we did it, but we'll give him stuff. And then he'll go in and he'll win. We'll get Rome, and then he'll give it to us, and we'll all be happy in the end. It'll be great. And if he fails, we'll just say, oh, we had nothing to do with it. It wasn't us. Don't look at us. He did it on his own. That campaign was also brutal. They started. You had a bunch of Garibaldians invade in September, and this conflict went through to November of 67. And you had a lot of martyrs, a lot of people during this time. One of my favorite was Peter Young, who was the Dutch Zouave. And this is at the time too, just a caveat, just a little bit. The nationality that was most predominant in the Papal Zouaves at the time was French. So the commands were in French. The unit was primarily French speaking, mostly French officers. But that was only in that period. After 66, it flips in terms of the amount of nationalities. The Dutch become the predominant. Still French speaking, still mostly French officers, but mostly Dutch. They really loved the Holy Father and wanted to defend him. So my favorite Dutch Zouave, Peter Young, his description was he was built like a tree. So at the Battle of Monte Libreri, which I believe was October 13th, the town was taken over by Garibaldians, and a company, Papal Zouaves, came up to the town. It was 90 Papal Zouaves, and there was 1,200 Garibaldians in the town. And his options were, you can take the town now, or you can wait for reinforcements. And they're like, we're going to take the town now. So the town was very narrow, very, very narrow streets. And the lieutenant is leading a charge, Lieutenant Arthur Guillaumin, and he was killed very quickly in the battle. And it was fierce hand-to-hand combat. And most of these fights with these small towns in the Papal States, it ended up being hand-to-hand combat because it's just narrow streets. You know, at the time we're still dealing with rifles, where you have to load one round at a time. It took a while, so hand-to-hand combat was frequent. And Peter Young was found with 14 Garibaldians around his dead body. So the story goes that he was protecting his men as they were moving forward, and he turned his rifle around and he clubbed 14 of them to death before he was so tired that he fell on his knees. He wasn't even bested. He just got exhausted. He fell to his knees, then he was just stabbed to death. And in the Dutch, he's very had streets named after him, children's books written after him. In that culture, he was held up for a very, very long time. Another one, the Dufresnols. So they're a pair of French brothers who were officers. I actually have a book about them too that you can get, and it's basically a lot of personal letters, memoirs about them. Emmanuel Dufresnel, the younger brother, he was a lieutenant. He came upon what town was it? Let me get I want to make sure I get the town right. I do not like getting that information incorrect. So it was on October 5th. It was a Valentino, which was on October 11th, is when he came upon a Garibaldian force at the town, and they ended up getting ambushed on the road. So they ended up, as they're getting ambushed, excuse me, I got the town wrong again. My apologies. It was Farnese. It's important to me to get these facts right. So it's Farnese. So he gets ambushed on the road. So as they get ambushed, they're getting shot at. He drew his saber, and he made a sign of the cross with his blade, and he said, "In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, forward." And they ran toward a house, and they displaced all these Garibaldians that were at the house, and they occupied it, and they were preparing to end up taking they wanted to take the town, so they're preparing for that, but there was just too many Garibaldians. They were getting swarmed. They ended up barricading themselves, and they snuck up around them, and they had to retreat. But what to do though? They were surrounded. So Emmanuel came up with the idea: is we're gonna have to fix bayonets. This is gonna get rough. This is gonna get rough. I will go out first. So Emmanuel, kicked down the door. He came out first, and he drew the attention of the Garibaldians on himself, and he was stabbed multiple times. And it was he ended up being able to escape. His men helped him get out of there, but he ended up dying a day later from his wounds. And he was so happy of the fact, though, that all his wounds were on the front of his body. He was very proud of that because it showed that he didn't turn around. He wasn't treated. He just took everything from the front, and he ended up dying a day later. Again, I'm ranting a little bit, but skip now to Mentana. Mentana was the greatest victory of the Papal Zouaves. This is the last stand, the last fight, and then this is where the French come in and actually help a little bit. So Empress Eugene, who was Catholic, was begging Napoleon III, send the French back in. We can't stand for this. They're going back on the deal. So Napoleon ended up sending a sizable force to the Papal States. Garibaldi desperately tried to get to Rome before that French force arrived, to no avail. So the French force arrived, and the Garibaldians ended up getting routed in a town called Mentana. So the Papal army, they were the ones doing the primary fighting. The French only came in much later as a reinforcement, as a backup. But the Zouaves during the fight were the tip of the spear. And the Mentana was basically, think of it, a castle surrounded by walls. Very, very cool town. But Garibaldi ended up leaving halfway through the fight. His main saying was Rome or death, Rome or death, Rome or death. Well, he chose to flee halfway through the final battle and leave his son and other people, other soldiers there, just get captured. And he fled into Italian territory. And the victory was so awesome, so sweet, that they built a monument to the dead Zouaves from the 1860 campaign at Campo Verano Cemetery in Rome, which you can still see. It's a very wonderful monument. It's a crusader on his knees with a standard, and St. Peter has keys, and he's pointing to the air with one hand, and the other is giving the crusader a sword. Very, very cool. But again, as when the French helped a little bit, and then the French remained in Rome with the garrison until the Franco-Prussian War. But that would be the next big stage. So again, long-winded answer. My apologies for that. Any comments or questions from y'all?
I don't think so. So I think we're fine. I think we're ready for the fall of Rome then, after with the Franco-Prussian War.
Yeah. So now you had another surge of Papal Zouaves come in, because it's serious. it's really serious. The threat to the Papal States was real. This is when you had a large English contingent come in, partly because you had 2 English martyrs during the 67 campaign, Alfred Coleridge and Julian Watts Russell. Julian Watts Russell is very young. He's like 17.
Wow.
And his brother, he joined because, you see, this is a common thread. These were young men. Another common thread among those Zouaves is a lot of them were seminarians. And they would come in before hitting subdeacon or something where they actually had some kind of order conferred to them. They would get permission to fight. That was Joseph Louis Gurn. He was a seminarian. And Julian Watts Russell, again, he wanted to do that too. He was a little young, so he wasn't on the path yet, but that's what he wanted to do. It is said that he was the first to reach the castle walls at Mentana before he was shot and killed. And he's referred to as a second Gurin, very, very holy, very pious. He doesn't have the same attached to him. He doesn't have like that same story of intercessions and visions and things like that, unfortunately. And they did open up his grave to see his body was incorruptible at one point, and unfortunately it was corrupting. But nonetheless, a very holy young man. He had a little monument at the battle site, which was destroyed in 1870 by the incoming Piedmontese. And there's a little monument that what's left of it is actually at the English College in Rome that you can see. It's a Mentana cross, the medal that the soldiers were given. In 1869, the First Vatican Council happens, and that's another big thing. People don't realize this. Because of the Papal Zouaves, because the heroic sacrifice of the Papal army, pushing back the Garibaldians, the First Vatican Council was able to happen. What do we get from the First Vatican Council, right? We get the papal infallibility, very, very important. So the Franco-Prussian Wars starts to pick up in 1870, and Napoleon III is getting desperate. He needs men. So what does he do? He pulls the French out of Rome again. And Victor Emmanuel II couldn't help himself. He knew this was his time because he knew the French were, what are they going to do about it? Absolutely nothing. So he tried to destabilize the Papal States. No, didn't work. There were no uprisings. There was no revolutionaries. Nothing like that was going on. But nonetheless, he sent one of his ministers to Pius IX with a letter. And in the letter, it said, because of all these revolutions happening, these uprisings in your territory, I will come in and protect you. Don't worry. Let me handle it. Let me be that force for you. Pius IX was reading this letter. This is September, by the way. So that's when they were going to invade. He was really mad. Pius IX screamed at the minister, and he said, you race of vipers. And the minister got so scared when he was leaving the chamber where the Pope was. He thought a window was a door, and he almost fell to his death. He was so freaked out by the incident. Yeah, it was. So they invaded anyway. Like I said, they didn't care. It's an open secret. They're just trying to come up with some excuse. So later down the line in history, people are oh, that's why. No, everyone knows. So they invaded nonetheless. It was 70,000 soldiers again. Something, some crazy amount. Papal army is like a similar size as it was before, 12,000 or something like that. So the plan was, what are we going to do this time? It's, what can you do? The plan was to fall back on Rome. So bits of fighting was allowed on the way, some resistance, but the Pope knew that the Rome is going to be where everything ends. So the Papal army makes its way back to Rome, and on the 20th is when the siege started that morning. So the Pope put out the parameters for the fight in Rome. And it was, look, I actually want you to surrender at the first cannon shot. And the Papal Zouaves, their commanders, all the Papal military were are you kidding me? Are you serious? You want us to surrender at first cannon shot? Because the Pope felt like he accomplished what he wanted. So basically what the Pope wanted to do is he wanted to show the world that his temporal powers being taken by force. It was against his will. And he was resisting. He was not complying. He was not going for it. That's what he wanted to convey to the world. But the Papal army, especially the Zouaves, were no, we have to fight with honor. We have to preserve our honor. So he said, okay, here are your new parameters then. You can fight until there's a breach in the walls. What does breach in the wall mean? To them, they took it as loosely as possible. There had to be a big, huge gaping hole is how they took it. So they ended up fighting. They ended up fighting for in the morning. They ended up fighting for. They ended up capitulating around 10 a.m. It was about 5-6 hours. But they really took it as loosely as possible. I mean, you had them throw straw mattresses and like little holes that kept popping up. It ended up being the Porta Pia that ended up getting blown out, and the people, the Piedmontese coming through. But no, it was also a very, very brutal fight. Anyway, they come in, they take over, and as the Zouaves and the rest of the Papal Army are going back to, they go back to the Vatican City. As they're heading back, they're getting accosted by the Piedmontese soldiers. They're getting accosted by these. There's a band of revolutionaries that were following the Piedmontese army. They're getting accosted by them. Some were even killed. They had medals ripped off them. Some were stabbed on the way. And this is after they surrendered. So it was pretty crazy. Yeah, very, 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 very sad. Again, the Roman people did not want. They did not want to be taken over. The convents were ransacked and destroyed. I mean, this is a trend you see whenever the Piedmontese or the Garibaldians came in. The local churches, convents, they suffered greatly. But there was the Bouillon Act in St. Peter's Square that night, and there was one last formation, one last military formation that morning before they were disembarked and all the foreigners sent home. There's a beautiful quote that I have to read from Patrick Keyes O'Clery, who is the author of the book I just republished. So the context is the Pope is coming out and giving a final blessing to this formation of military. He said, when all the soldiers were lined up facing the Vatican and ready to leave, Colonel Alet stepped forward, and his voice broken with emotion. So Colonel Alet is the commander of all the Papal Zouaves, who's Swiss actually. He shouted, "Mes enfants, viva Piedmont!" A mighty cheer broke out from the troops. Just at that moment, excuse me, I read that wrong. "Mes enfants, viva Piedmont!" A mighty cheer broke out from the troops. Just at that moment, the Pope appeared on the balcony and, raising his hands to heaven, prayed, "May God bless my faithful children." The enthusiasm of that supreme moment was indescribable. With a frantic elegine hurrah, a Hungarian Zouave drew his sword, and immediately, with a simultaneous scuff of steel, thousands of unsheathed swords glinted in the sun. The scene was absolutely moving. At the thought of leaving the Holy Father, tears of bitter regret ran down the cheeks of those men who had defied death in so many desperate battles. The trumpets gave the order to advance, and as it moved, the head of the column let out a last sad cry of "Long live Pius IX," which echoed row after row, was repeated by the whole army and by the crowd gathered to watch the departure. So a lot were sent to Civitavecchia, some were sent to Genoa. Very terrible, horrid conditions. There's a story I can tell maybe later of a Papal Zouave who would become a congressman in New York who was almost killed while he was under captivity by a Piedmontese soldier. But anyway, and that ends the Italian, the 9th Crusade, the Italian unification. The Papal Zouaves would, a French contingent went back to France to fight to defend France, not necessarily for the regime, but to defend France itself. As a unit, they rebranded as the Volunteers of the West, and they actually had a banner called the Banner of the Sacred Heart. You mentioned Pickett's Charge. In a similar fashion, the most well-known battle for the Volunteers of the West was the Battle of Lognes, or Wagner-Pété. And during that fight, it was, they didn't have a lot of men. They had about 300 Papal Zouaves were charging after several thousand Bavarians to make sure the French could retreat during that battle because it was not going well. And of the 300 who ended up charging, only 102 came back. 198 were killed. 198 were martyred. But they were able to keep their standard. And so this flag of the Sacred Heart was stained with blood, and it's on display at the Lognes Museum. And then you had another contingent, mostly Spanish, who were fighting with Prince Alfonso Carlos de Bourbon, who was a Papal Zouave. He went back to fight in the Carlist Wars, and in 1873, he had his own Zouave battalion, which comprised the many Papal Zouave veterans. He put in charge of his Zouave battalion a Dutch Papal Zouave, Ignacy Wales, and he ended up being killed at the siege of Igualada. I think it was 1874, it might have been 1873. But anyway, he had their standard of the unit, and it had a picture of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception on the back. It says Dios Patre y Rey, and then the other side was a cloud with the Spanish monarchy, the papal coat of arms. Very, very beautiful. Anyway, there's a barricade in the streets in Igualada, and they needed to get through it. The Republicans were fiercely defending it. And the flag bearer, they kept getting shot. People kept getting shot. So he took the flag himself. He said, the Zouaves go where the flag goes. And he threw the flag over the barricade. And all the Zouaves poured over. They ended up winning. But as he's throwing the flag over, he gets shot multiple times. He ends up dying. But the Zouaves continued the fight in other ways after that. You had You had a group of Papal Zouaves end up being missionaries in Africa. They defended the missionaries and the Catholics from very, very violent locals. And then you had others who, they put down the sword and picked up the pen. They wrote editorials, participated in government, some started businesses. But there was a common thread in all of this. They all retained their uniform. They all desired to go back. They all firmly believed that they would be back in Rome one day with that uniform, retaking it for the Holy Father. That day never came to pass, unfortunately, but they were prepared and ready.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me as you were telling the story. It seems to me that particularly after, let's just say, the French Revolution, just to give us a date, you really do see the erosion of not just Christendom, but also every attempt that you do see of Catholic resistance. Most of them, not all, but most of them end up failing in some form or fashion. So you've given us this example. I was reminded actually as you were speaking of both the Vendée Rebellion as well as the Carlist Wars. And to my knowledge, and again, my history in this whole period is a little bit scant. To my knowledge, the only real Catholic success story, perhaps you could call it, would maybe be Spain post-Spanish Civil War. And only that really lasts until about 1970. And then, of course, modern Spain. I was even talking with my priest last night about this. Is like, my ancestry is in Spain, and Spain is, it's always been known as Catholic Spain, but it's nowhere near that today. It's just so secular and liberal. And so, yeah, you telling the story reminded me of just kind of how all of this is. And I'm kind of wondering on a practical level, I see some people, real quick, I'll just answer this. For you guys tuning in, Anthony, he's with his parole officer tonight. He's Italian, so he's with his parole officer. He basically, long story short, one thing that I was thinking about as you were giving the story was the practical. So I was seeing people in the comments saying, could you picture today if the Pope was to call a crusade? And I'm sure every single Catholic guy has thought about that. If the Pope was to call a crusade, where would it be? And would I join up? I'm like, okay, well, if a Catholic,
every Catholic guy has thought about that in the last week.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, every devout Catholic guy. See, the sad thing is, I feel
I
like
was gonna say that. What was it, like the meme like 6 months ago was something about like, oh, how often do you think about the Holy Roman Empire? It's more of like, how often do I think about like the Papal States? How often do I think about being a crusader? For me, that's anyway.
Yeah, crusader is a little bit more common, I think, in our circles. I was just kind of bemoaning the fact that I think if the Pope was to call a crusade today, it would no one would show up. It'd be it would be a handful of Americans, probably a handful of French. Right, so maybe a few Italians and Spanish, but that would be pretty much it. Everyone else would be condemning him. International.
I think you'd get a lot of polls.
You get a lot of polls. Yeah, that's fair. You'd probably
you definitely yes you would.
That's fair. That's fair.
So you were mentioning the connection with the Vendée and the Carlist, and yes, 100%. They're cut of that same cloth. So it's the term that I and some other people would use is counter-revolutionary. So it's the same ideology where they're truly fighting for Catholic principles, for altar and throne. And that's why you also see this connection. You see with, François de Charette, Henry de Cathanu, you see their ancestors fight with the Pope. And then you see them continue. Some of them continue with Carlos. They all supported this cause. So it was about maybe a century, from the late 1700s to the late 1800s, where they're literally taking, it's militant Catholicism in the truest sense. They're literally fighting to preserve the Catholic order. They're fighting to defend Christendom. And unfortunately, it's kind of like maybe a good term for it would be like macroeconomics. You get what I'm saying? So things, they show good and it looks good, but because of a lot of macro factors, so these factors outside of them, all these external pressures, it just didn't end up working out. It's such a shame. But that's just the age that we live in.
Yeah, I was thinking because so much of these, counter revolutions, they only succeed, I think, aside from the fact that they only succeed if God really wills them to succeed. But on a natural level, if the society is really baked and soaked in Catholic principles, even if they're just philosophical Catholic principles, because so many of these revolutions, happen post Reformation period. And when you have Luther's break with the church, the introduction of nominalism, not just in philosophical schools, but applied to theology. So we no longer need the church. It's just kind of this hierarchical relic of a medieval period. Why can't we be modern and enlightened? And as a reaction to Luther's just hardcore view of man, just man being this totally depraved, pile of dung, the rationalist world is born, and they're like, okay, why can't we be these free thinkers who live and love how we see fit? Took Luther's nominalism, but then just applied it to, to politics and ditched the religion. And then, of course, born all these revolutions.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's a shame.
So one question for you. I don't know if you know the answer, but both Nick and I are firearms enthusiasts.
So
do you happen to know what was the, I'm sure there wasn't maybe a standard issue rifle, but do you know what was like the most common rifle among the Papal Zouaves?
All right, this is actually very interesting. Prior to 1868, it was I think the correct term is percussion rifles. You put one ball in, then you got to put the powder in, and look, man, that wasn't it, because you started to have the technology come in where they were smooth bore too.
Yeah.
Had barreling come in and things like that, and that's what the Piedmontese has. They were, like I said, in terms of equipment, that's a big reason why in 1868 did not work out, especially with artillery. They had some pretty trash smooth bore artillery, and the Piedmontese are coming in. Again, they were one of the most well-trained armies at the time. So knowing this, the the officers wanted to get better technology. So Lamoriciere ended up being exiled. He exiled himself again, and he wanted to return when the fighting was starting to pick up again, or the threat to the Papal States was getting increased in 1865. He ended up dying before he could return back. So another general came in and took over, General Hermann Kanzler. So Kanzler, again, realized the weapons were not up to standard. So he put in an order actually with Remington rifles. So Remington rolling block rifles. So the Papal Army ordered 10,000 of these. There were two contracts that were made, one in England and then one in Belgium. And they ended up arriving in 1868. So the nickname for these rifles are the Pontificos. It's actually very interesting. So M1868 Remington rolling block rifle Pontificos. There are three different versions that were made. You had the artillery version, which was very, very short, gendarmerie, so police version, about a mid-sized rifle, and then you had the Zouave, or the infantry version, which was the longest, and the socket, or a bayonet that would go underneath. Very, very cool, and these could shoot much, much faster. So in 67 in Mentana, that was the first time the French used their chassepot rifle. So it's a similar technology, and it was very, very effective. So they were very, very happy to get a rifle that was even superior to the chassepot in 68. So that was used in the Siege of Rome. That's the only real in the little small battles that happened prior to it in that campaign, the 1870 campaign. That's the only time that ended up really being applied. But so I'm not home right now. I'm away, but I'll put on a virtual background of if I were to be home. So if you look in the corner, actually, I got two of them.
Okay.
They're both gendarmerie versions, but they're from each contract. So one from the English contract and one from the Belgian contract. And what's very cool about the rifles too is they have the cross keys of St. Peter stamped into them. Like cross keys of St. Like literally, it's very cool. So if you hold the rifle up, and if you go on my Twitter page, you'll be able to actually find it. It's just each one is slightly different, but it's very, very unique, very, very cool. And there's a story that goes, I don't know it too well, so I'm only going to be able to get the generalities right, not the dates. But the Ethiopians, I think it was the Ethiopians. Maybe you can look it up, Rob, to make sure I'm getting the answers right. But they ended up fighting against this Italians coming in. I think like a 20 years later, maybe 30 years later. But they ended up buying these rifles. Like they acquired them at some point because the Italians were selling them, and they ended up using it against the Italians. So like 40 years later or something like that, they ended up being used to kill Italians.
40 years later, the Pope's rifles were used against the Italian nationalists again. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it took some time. Again, that's just a very general understanding. I need to look up the specifics. I don't know that story too well, but that's just interesting.
Is a rolling block rifle, because again, I'm trying to remember myself. Rolling block rifle, is this basically like a first edition bolt action style rifle where
No,
it's not?
It was a breech loading rifle.
It's a breech. Okay, it's a breech loading rifle. Gotcha. Man, they're really close in era. If the war would have been a little bit later in time, they may have made a deal with Colt. Then they would have won. They would have won. So,
well, because the repeaters were out already at this time.
Yeah, because it's like the Henry repeater was already out. I don't know how common it was in Europe. I'm gonna guess pretty
rare.
Pretty rare, yeah. Because that thing was, essentially a machine gun on the battlefield in the Civil War. But yeah, I was just gonna say, if they would have just given 100 Henry repeaters at the Siege of Rome, they would have won. They would have won. As a Texan, I often like to think about, I'm like, what if one guy was to just give one AR-15 at the Battle of the Alamo? Would history have changed?
Yeah, what would have happened? So I have the more specific history about that whole thing. So Ethiopia ended up getting between 1883 and 1859 5,000 of these rolling block rifles. So they used them up until the 1920s. So during their fight in 1896 with Italy, they ended up defeating the Italians partly with these rifles, and they used them up until 1935.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they were fighting against. They were using them against Mussolini even.
Jeez. That's crazy. Someone wrote this comment on YouTube. This is pretty funny. Can't believe there are Papal Zouave Giga Auto scholars out there too based.
God. Guys, you're on Twitter too much.
That's me.
You speak English after a while.
Terminal brain rot.
Yeah, right.
Terminal brain rot. Yeah.
So if you had kind of summarize the story of the Papal Zouaves, what should we take away from the Zouaves as Catholics today?
Okay, so basically, the time period that we live in is the time period that we live in, right? We're all called to holiness. All right, we're all called to be priests, prophets, and kings. All right, we have to. It might be difficult. We can't maybe do the same exact thing they did, right? We can't go fight for the Pope. We can't go have red martyrdom. But there's ample opportunity in our time today for white martyrdom. There's ample opportunity in our time period to get out and to promote the causes and the beliefs of our faith. So basically, we need that same Catholic spirit, that same heroism that they had, the same desire and cause to unite with the faith, with the Pope, and to desire defending him, and if so, and even if it means being martyred. So basically, take that same spirit, that same energy, and apply it into something else. It's going to look different for everybody. It really will, especially with the way that the world's going, and it is just, you know, whatever your vocation is, whatever your capacity is, to do something like that, put that time and energy into it. And you know, for me, I feel like it's even. I feel partially it's bringing attention to them in the first place. You know, that's what I really love to do.
And how can people find more of your work and support what you do?
So you can go over to my website, papalzouave.com. My YouTube channel. I have a YouTube channel that's up. I have a few videos. I have several books that are republished. So that's a lot of material is written about the Zouaves prior to like 1929, which is like whatever the date is for copyright. So what I do is I republish older works. There have been 3 so far. The first one was with Aruca Press, and that is a story about over a dozen papal soldiers who were martyred at Castelfidardo. And I added engravings that were in a French version. So there was an English translation in the 19th century, but no engravings. So I added the engravings in, republished it. Second, I wanted to see where AI was at with translating.
Yeah.
So I did an experiment. I took a shorter biography, and I found, and from people who know French, they said it was about like 90%ish accurate, which is pretty good. Took a long time to make. Like, it really took a long time to do. And I would say that I was only successful because of my knowledge of the topic and the subject, because I had to go in. I didn't just plug it in and say, oh, it's finished. No, I went line by line, making sure everything was good to go. So I'm very happy with that. And that's about the Dufresnols. So Emmanuel Dufresnol and his brother, who were martyred in the 1867 campaign. And then my newest release came out about a month ago. Was a book by an Irish Papal Zouave, Patrick Keys O'Clery, who wrote a very authoritative 2-volume work on the history of Italy, the Italian unification. So from about 1796 to 1870. So I combined the 2 volumes and released it as one. It's like 800-something pages. It is really awesome. And yeah, Patrick Keys O'Clery, I don't know if we have time to get into or not, but he fought in the Papal Army in the very late 1860s, and he befriended an American Papal Zouave named Charles Tracy, who would later become a congressman to New York. And in 1870, when the siege was imminent, they both rushed back to Rome to go fight for the Holy Father one last time. And it was actually very interesting. Is they had to sneak into Rome, because when they got to the port city Civitavecchia, it was already taken over. So a future American congressman and an Irish guy sneak into Rome. Anyways, I just think it's very cool. He's my favorite congressman. But that gets me into a future project that I'm doing. I'm actually researching for a original book right now that's about Charles Tracy, the American congressman who would go and fight, or the future American congressman. I have one of his private. I have a private scrapbook put together by his sister, several newspaper clippings about his doings, a picture or two. Very, very interesting. That I'm hoping to release in 8 to 12 months. I still need to find a publisher. So if anyone knows anyone from like 10 or Sophia Press or any other cool Catholic publishers, hit me up. I would be very, very interested. But I'm very, very happy with the direction that's going. Another project that I'm working on a newsletter, like a semi-annual newsletter. So I'm hoping maybe the anniversary of the Piedmont-Sardinia, November 3rd, and maybe hoping that'll be ready to go. But my organization, I'm trying to bring into the direction of a historical society. I really want to preserve the memory, preserve the books, the documents. You know, it's at the moment it's mostly me doing everything. I have some people reaching out, and I'm slowly starting to figure out ways how other people can put their time in. But my website, YouTube, the books, a little bit of a winded answer, but there's just a lot I have planned. So I'm very excited for the future.
Well, that's awesome.
That
You
is
have any
hold on,
questions
Coach.
there?
Oh, sorry. One thing I got to interrupt because this is pertinent to my research. Coach P said Charles Tracy had a son named Richard who became a famous detective who wore a yellow trench coat, had the first Apple Watch. I don't know. Is that a joke or something? I don't know what that means.
Dick Tracy joke.
Oh, you're getting me excited. I'm very serious about this research into him. So I thought
You have to understand with this audience. With this audience,
with this audience, I have probably looked at over 1,000 newspapers like in the past month, maybe more. Anyway. Sorry. Nick, do you have anything?
Yeah, last thoughts for me. So it's not necessarily on this subject, but kind of a cool story just about this show. So last night I had the privilege of singing the vigil mass for the Assumption at my local parish. And after the mass, we had a bunch of people that were chatting outside, and I had 3 little kids with their dad walk up. And the kids told me how much they enjoy this show, but particularly they really like the trivia stuff from back in the day. That we did.
No, really?
Yeah, little kids.
Man.
I think the oldest was, 10 at the most, 10 at the absolute most. The other ones, like maybe like 8 or 6 or something like that. And anyway, but Rob, I'm sure you get it online. I know Anthony gets it online. I get it online. I get it in person. Just all the love and support that you guys as the fans give, not just for this show, my own personal show, The Traditional Thomist, but it just in general, it's really, really awesome because, the joy of being able to meet cool guests like we've gotten tonight and get a really fascinating history lesson, as well as to see you guys chatting about different devotions in the chat, or just even coming up and talking about how these discussions, whether they be historical or theological, apologetics or whatever, how they help you guys so much. It does mean the world. And so I guess, my just final thoughts is just continue to be loving Catholics out there and share this episode with your friends, because I learned quite a bit. I'm a history buff, but I'm definitely not a history buff when it comes to the formation of the modern state of Italy. My expertise is more in the American Civil War. So it was very fascinating, and I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely a little more niche. I think we need to clear up one little thing before we end, though. Is the Italy is fake thing. Rob might have a little bit of different ideas than me about it, but the joke is that it was very artificially manufactured compared with everything else. It's extremely fake police BIs. 99% more people voting than there are alive. Conniving happening behind the scenes, treachery, stage uprisings. It was this is what we say when it's fake, is that it was manufactured. It was very man-made. It was not an organic, true revolution. That was an expression of the people. I think it was during the Neapolitan times, I forget who said it, but someone said Italy is nothing more than a geographical expression.
Yeah, exactly.
But that is, all that being, who was that, Rob?
That's a good question.
I think everyone, just to help us in the algorithm, definitely type into the comment section your favorite Italian story.
It was Metternich, the Austrian who did the Congress of Vienna.
Yeah, but I guess he wasn't Italian. But anyway, probably people really identified with the region. Even in Italy today, you have people still identifying mostly with the region. You have literally secessionist movements in the north and in the south. In the south, it's more Bourbon than the north. The north has nothing to do with that.
In reality, they don't even really speak Italian. They speak Tuscan.
No, right? That's a crazy thing. That is the crazy thing. Each little region had its own little dialect. In 1860, it was something like 10% of Italians spoke Italian. It's just a stupid number, absolutely stupid. We didn't even get into what the actual regime, the Piedmontese, did in Italy. We didn't have time for that, unfortunately. But in the book, The Making of Italy, it lists these very anti-clerical Catholic laws that were put in place by the regime. Even in the term I like to use for the takeover of the peninsula, I like to say it was the Piedmontization of the peninsula. Basically, it was the culture of Piedmont just coming in and taking over. But all this to say, all right, because does it mean that the modern state of Italy isn't not a real thing? Of course it is, and I think as Catholics we desire for its working with the faith. We did, like any state, we desire for it to be Catholic. We desire for its laws to reflect that, its culture. I'm not gonna snap my finger. If we were to imagine go back to the borders of 1859, like I snapped my fingers, we went back to the borders of 1859, it probably wouldn't work. Same thing of America. If I snapped my fingers, we had a monarchy, like a perfect Catholic monarchy, it wouldn't work because we can't handle it right now. It's the same thing with that. So it's like, just because it's like we like to play around and we like to talk about history and it was before everything got really secular and liberal, the Piedmontese taking over, doesn't mean I don't think Italy's not a real country right now, guys. All right, it's just, I mean, it's just ridiculous. But then again, I tell these people all the time I'm 0% Spanish, but they don't listen to me. Anyway,
R.I.P.
Well, anyways, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Brendan. I know I learned a lot too. I knew a lot of the history, but not of the Zouaves themselves. So that was awesome. But I do have a link to the book that you talked about in the description and in the live chat. So if anyone is interested, click on the link to check out that book. I know I'm going to order it myself. So, but anyways, thank you once again, Brandon. And I don't know if we have plans for next week. I'm sure we'll do a show on Tuesday. I don't know what it's going to be. I'm sure
we could always just do a well, I mean, I can easily find like 50,000 news segments. It'll make you mad, but I can find 50,000 news segments. Or we can always do a theology Q&A. Those are always fun. Those flow.
Well, I think we both know Anthony will just have
not saying I need to be on not saying I need to be on next week, but just saying we only scratched the surface. There are so many individual stories about Zouaves that we can get into. And I didn't even mention my last. I recently went to the Netherlands and Belgium to visit the Zouave museum they have in the Netherlands, and I met up with a historian who's like he's 80-year-old. He's like 80 years old, but he's wonderful. He knows so much about the Zouaves, but he doesn't communicate via the internet at all. He doesn't know how to use the internet. He only communicate via email. I learned a lot from him. He's great. So there's a lot to tell with that. So that's for another day, but
yeah, we'll definitely have to.
That's the point. There's a lot.
Definitely have to have you on again. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Oh wait, what does it say? Retitle this episode Part 1. Yeah, we'll have to do that. Anyways,
and then someone asked what the book title was. We talked about 3 books, or I at least talked about 3 books: the Martyrs of Castelfidardo, The Making of Italy, the History of Italian Unification Every Catholic Should Know, and then the other one was Edodat and Emmanuel Dufournel. And you can also find those on my website. Go to papalzouave.com, PAPALZOUAVE.com. Go to the book section. I also have other merchandise on my website. I got flags of the unit, patches, stickers. So
I don't suppose you know where to buy one of the rolling blocks, do you?
So here's what you can do. Just search up M1868 Remington rolling block rifle. Just put in the search section, appear in the last month, and hey, you might get lucky. I did. When I bought the rifle again, called Divine Providence, I told my wife I had to do it. The euro was at the lowest level parity with the dollar in like decades. It was 97, like €1 was worth 97 cents. That's insane. That's like, no, I got it wrong. €1 is worth a dollar. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The dollar had a strength on the euro.
Right,
like by 3 cents for the first time, because usually a euro is worth like $1.25. I got a discount, big discount, so I was very happy.
Yeah, I will have to look because I want one of those, so we'll see. But anyways, thank you once again, Brendan, and thanks for joining us tonight. And when we figure out what we'll do next week, we'll let everyone know. But once again, happy feast of the Assumption, and we'll see you all later.